Federal Executive Council meeting, as we have just heard, the main agenda was the medium-term economic framework and the fiscal strategy paper from the Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning and, of course, the Budget Office. But let me, so we do not miss it, mention that there were two other important smaller items, no less important, but smaller items that we dealt with. One was the approval by the Federal Executive Council of $100 million African Development Bank loan under a program called the Youth Investment Fund. That investment fund program is to fund young people between the age of 18, or young entrepreneurs between the age of 18 and 35 in the small and medium scale micro enterprises across a range of funding. There is equity, there is debt, there is grants, there is support of various kinds under that AFDB program, and we all know what that means in terms of being able to support and help and assist and encourage young entrepreneurs at the lower levels, at the, as I said, MSME level. Secondly, there was approval for an Islamic Development Bank support for Yobe State, and it's an integrated ADP, an integrated agricultural development project. And in both cases, these are multilateral development partners. Their funding is concessional. It is relatively affordable and long-term. Well, the main topic of the day, of course, was the presentation in line with the in line with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, really, I would say, the presentation of the 2026 to 2028 medium-term expenditure framework. And Mr. President, as a preface for that discussion, expressed appreciation for the unwavering dedication to his renewed hope agenda by the members of the Federal Executive Council. And he pointed out how it does remain the driving force behind this commitment to developing and putting in place and a reformed economy driven by rapid, sustained, inclusive, and job-rich growth, and thereby making Nigeria competitive globally. Of course, he pointed out that in recent data, the most up-to-date data, even the third quarter data released for 2025 by the National Bureau of Statistics, continued to emphasize and show that the reforms were taking root. The economy was showing continued resilience and, in fact, momentum. You are well aware growth was still at 3.89% above that of the similar period for last year, with agriculture industry growing quite rapidly, inflation easing. And as you know, he pointed out, though, that whilst these gains are encouraging, it is still below his target, because his target is 7% per annum growth, more than double population growth, in order to lift millions of Nigerians out of poverty. So that was his basic review of where we are. And what he emphasized next was that expenditure had to be improved on. The efficiency of spending must be, in order to get maximum value from every naira spent, and of course, the prioritization that would need. So he did direct that the ministries, departments, and agencies should prioritize their spending, capital spending, to focus on growth-enhancing projects, growth-enhancing initiatives, and that the economic management team would help collate those priorities for his final input. And of course, the large legacy projects would also be a priority of Mr. President. They will be prioritized in terms of capital expenditure. So we can expect much more incisiveness, efficiency, and results from capital expenditure. And that really is where we now took the Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning, now took over and presented the 2026 to 2028 medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper. Thank you. Honorable Minister for Information. Thank you for your questions. I'm not sure which ones we will find out relate to me or which ones relate to myself and my colleague, the Honorable Minister for Budget and Economic Planning. I will start, the first shall be the last. So I'll start with the last. Islamic Development Bank, 50 million naira agricultural development project for Yobe State. That's quite straightforward enough. Arise, $50 million, $50 million US dollars. The issue of overlapping budget, I think there is a commitment to stick to, as much as possible, revert to a normal budget cycle, January to December. That's the commitment. It takes all parties agreeing and working towards that laudable goal, which is to normalize and have the budget, the capital budget we are talking, because we know that the recurrent runs from January to December and then stops. Let me say that as regards to 2024, 2025 budgets, capital budgets in particular, and the timing of when the 2026 budget will be laid before the National Assembly, which is the normal procedure for them to now do their job of coming out with an appropriation bill. I have obviously my input, my comments on it, and my information on it, but I think the real starting place for that has to be the Ministry of Economic Planning and Budget, and then I can really speak to items such as how much, the releases and so forth. But what I can say is that the 2024 budget, which the National Assembly extended virtually by a year, the capital budget, as you know, is basically fulfilled, and the 2025 arrangements have been made, the warrants have been issued, and capital expenditure by the MDAs is ongoing, and we have to, of course, December 31st of this year to complete that exercise. But I think because of the remit that they have, the Ministry for Budget and Economic Planning are perhaps best placed to put the whole issue, particularly of the upcoming 2026 budget, in better perspective. But I stand willing to also chip in. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, good afternoon. Further to the coordinating minister's remarks, where he read from the Mr. President's own remarks. The Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning today presented a memorandum on requesting the approval of the 2026 to 2028 medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper. The memorandum was presented on behalf of the ministry by the Director General of the Budget Office, Tanim Yakubu, who was supported by his team, who have worked very hard together with members of the economic management team and the Ministry of Budget and Planning in coming up with this memorandum. In addition, inputs were obtained from various relevant stakeholders, including government agencies, organized private sector, civil society organization, development partners, through both technical discussions, bilateral engagement, as well as expert consultations. The engagements were aimed at ensuring that the document is representative of the collective aspiration of stakeholders. Relevant inputs from stakeholders have been integrated into the framework, which include, among others, a macroeconomic background, as well as review of the 2025 Federal Government of Nigeria budget implementation, key parameters for the 2026-2028 medium-term fiscal framework assumption, which include assumptions about oil price benchmark, and for the first time, a target oil production as well as benchmark oil production. The target oil production is a production figure of 2.06 million barrels per day, which the management of the oil industry is tasked to produce. However, so that we don't run into revenue problems, we use a benchmark oil production figure of 1.8 for the budget purposes. So those are important. This is an important new innovation to distinguish between the figure that is ambitious, guided by consultations with the industry and challenging the industry too, but for budget purposes using a lower figure. Even the oil benchmark of $64.85, which is being used this year, is lower than the average selling price of Nigeria's crude oil, because Nigeria is a premium Bonilite, among other premium blends producer. So our oil prices tend to be higher on average than the Brent prices, but for abundance of caution, we are using $64.85, as well as an exchange rate of 1,512 to the Naira for the year 2026, given that it's a pre-election year. By law, there is a lot of election activity spending that can typically affect exchange rate. And the growth rate is projected at $4.68. The federation revenue is estimated at 50.74 trillion. This is the revenue that is shared by the three tiers of government, whereas based on that, the distribution among the tiers of government, that the federal government is projected to receive 22.6 trillion from the federation account, while the state and local government are expected to receive 16.3 trillion and 11.85 trillion respectively for the local governments. So accordingly, the total Federal Government of Nigeria revenue from all sources is projected at 34.33 trillion, inclusive of 4.98 returned by government-owned enterprises. And this figure is lower by 6.55 trillion, or 16% lower than that of the 2025 budget estimate. And the federal government expenditure breakdown by major heads shows that the statutory transfers will be around 3 trillion, debt service expenditure 15.91 trillion, and non-recurrent debt expenditure, which is personnel cost, pension cost, about 15.27 trillion. And interesting, the deficit is projected at 20.1 trillion, which is 3.61% of the estimated GDP. In addition, the Federal Executive Council took comments and approved the medium-term expenditure plan as fiscal strategy paper for presentation to the National Assembly. However, it is also noted that Mr. President, in addition to this, have taken several steps in his role as the President of the Federation, as the Chief Executive Officer of the Federation, where he had invited state governments and local governments, the three tiers of government, at a meeting of the National Economic Council to call for more collaboration and coordination between fiscal and monetary policies, which was approved by the National Economic Council, and the coordinating Minister of the Economy, the Central Bank Governor, and myself are directed to report periodically. Equally, Mr. President had sought the approval of the National Economic Council for them to appreciate the need to invest more in security spending, in particular, the rehabilitation of training institutions of security agencies. Equally, Mr. President sought the approval of the National Economic Council, and it indeed conferred the approval that there should be increased federation vigilance to eliminate revenue loss from illegal activities in the oil and gas sectors as well as critical mineral sectors. Furthermore, Mr. President emphasized and sought the approval of the National Economic Council that critical minimum transformational investment is required for infrastructure, and therefore renewed hope infrastructure funding from both the federal government and constituents of the Federation should continue, as well as measures to boost domestic production and diligent implementation of the Renewed Hope World Development Program. Mr. President believes that having stabilized the macroeconomy, we need to ensure that we sustain the reforms. And when all these measures are taken and implemented in conjunction with the medium-term expenditure framework as well as fiscal strategy program, they will generate higher levels of economic growth. Thank you. With the National Assembly, because we don't want to preempt their permission, or we don't want to take their permission for granted. The protocol of presentation of a budget is that once it is ready, it is submitted to Mr. President, approved by Federal Executive Council, and Mr. President, as an ardent believer in institutions, have always respected the National Assembly telling him when they are ready to do so. But if in terms of, maybe Farouk's question will have been better, is how soon can it be ready? I think having the medium-term expenditure approved, which again is going to the National Assembly, and we are hoping there will be quick around time, but we now have a guide, plus other measures that were taken today by the Federal Executive Council, because President was very clear on the prioritization and the role of the economic management team, in particular the coordinating minister of the economy. So that is giving us the platform to conclude the 2026 budget. Equally, in the presentation of the MTEF, it was acknowledged that a significant portion of the capital expenditure in 2025 will be rolled over to 2026. So ministries, if it has been approved, if it is approved by the National Assembly, ministries will use that. And that relates to the other, the second question, or even the other questions. Mismatch between revenue and expenditure is a fact of life in any budget system, whether at company level or national level. And the coordinating minister, especially in his role as Minister of Finance, is dealing with that challenge daily. He's dealing with a world in which interest rates are changing. Interest rates changes will determine how much debt service will change, even before different from what was approved or what was indicated. And that is significant in all the years. So we are engaging, he's leading us in engagement with the National Assembly. They understood the challenge and will submit an adjustment which we believe they will consider favorably. That goes to the issue of the capital component of 2025, asked by Arise, which will answer. I think there's always a confusion. First, there's no issue on the personnel and recurrent side. And capital component is work in progress. Some capital projects are multi-year projects in any case. So disaggregating what is missed out because it must be done in the time frame and what will in any case continue in other years sometimes can be difficult. But the important and comforting thing is that the coordinating minister of the economy is leading us in engagement with the National Assembly, and they understood what we are doing. Of course, there is pressure, and within that, we believe we are making steady progress. Capital commitment, particularly on Mr. President priorities, renewed hope, infrastructure funds, is going on well, and it's amazing how we are able to meet all debt service obligations, even at the heightened interest rate and heightened levels. Why is 16% lower revenue? Why? We are using lower oil prices. Last year we used $75 as oil revenue price. And then last year we used a benchmark production of 2.06 million. This year we are using 1.84. As for the price, we are using 64.85, unlike last year's 75. Thank you.
The Federal Executive Council meeting today was in two parts. The first part was had to do with the swearing in of 5 permanent secretaries. 3 of them from representing the geopolitical zones and 2 representing the states. And then we had also the swearing in of the chairman and 2 members of the National Population Commission. And again, the council observed a minute silence in honor of the late Joy Ogu, who passed on the 13th of October 2025, this year. Joy Ogu was the Honorable Minister of State for Foreign Affairs in the administration of President Obasanjo. May her soul rest in peace. The council itself was only one item was actually considered, the medium-term expenditure framework and the fiscal policy paper 2026 to 2028. And I have with me here the Honorable Minister of Finance to talk about some of the preliminary discussions from the President himself in Council. And then the Honorable Minister of Budget will discuss the MTEF and FSP proper. And then we have additional comments as it relates to the Ministry of Health from the Honorable Minister of State for Health. Thereafter, we will take questions or comments if there are, and then we round up the session. So let me begin by bringing in the Honorable Minister of Finance to give us his opening comments on what the President said and Council and some of the implications for our economy. Honorable Minister. All ministries to meet quarterly with the Ministry of Finance, the Coordinating Minister of the Economy, and the Economic Management team, so that they can continue to prioritize projects, especially in view of the performance of the budget itself. There was also a decision taken by the Federal Executive Council to establish service centers for agricultural mechanization in the 6 geopolitical zones. This indeed will help to support and boost agricultural mechanization that will in turn also improve all year-round farming across communities in Nigeria. There is also an approval by the Federal Executive Council granted to the Ministry of Digital Communication and Digital Economy on the deployment of towers to places that are currently underserved. Under that program, about 4,000 towers will be erected in underserved communities. The presentation of the Honorable Minister of Communications and Digital Economy indicates that about 23 million Nigerians are currently underserved, meaning that they are unable to do any form of communications due to the absence of some of these towers that are not available in their communities. So the Federal Executive Council has taken a decision that 4,000 of such towers be established or erected in these very underserved communities across this country. Indeed, this will also help in fighting insecurity and enhancing commerce and economic activity amongst the people of those communities. These are some of the decisions taken today, and like we said earlier, many of these decisions are focused on this one item agenda, which is the medium-term expenditure framework and the fiscal policy paper that you have heard from the Honorable Minister of Finance and the Honorable Minister of Budget, of course with additional comments from the Honorable Minister of Health as it relates to the health sector. I now leave the floor open for comments and questions. As usual, please identify yourself and they will answer you. Yes, Liberty. Prerogatives of every nation. I mean, the American government or any other government, Nigerian government, anybody, any country has its own visa policy, which it reviews from time to time. Maybe you're asking that question, having the background of the recent tensions that we have had. Let me say that government to government, Nigeria and the United States are still working closely to find solutions wherever we have some challenges to be addressed. And the government of Nigeria is committed, is open, and is engaging the United States to sort out whatever areas there are to be sorted out in terms of some of those diplomatic tensions that have been created. But we still have normal diplomatic relations between Nigeria and the United States, and we are working perfectly together to ensure that we continue to advance the mutual interest of both countries. Let me stay at that point. I hope that this is not actually part of what was discussed in the Federal Executive Council, and we always want discussions at these FEC meetings to be limited to that. But we will, of course, continue to explain to you as transparently and as honestly as possible whatever commentaries or questions that you have relating to the operations of government. We want to thank you most sincerely, gentlemen of the press, and to ask you, as we always do, to please report patriotically and honestly, transparently, in the interest of our country. Thank you very much for your attention.
Next. Kindly step forward to take your oath. Of the Institute of Strategic Management of Nigeria. He has received several honors and awards,